because you're black, or because you're gay, or because you're a lesbian, or something like, or because you're trans, or and so on. So people go, yeah, hey, that is the reason that I don't have a waterfront mansion. Yeah, too fucking right it is. Now, this is a playbook that works. It preys on people's insecurities and doubts and uncertainties, sense of self-worth, and just their desire to have, well, I want what he has, there's no downside here. I get all the goodies that he has, but I don't have anything taken away from me. Whether you go to the poorest peasants in a place and then say, hey, Jose, the fact that you've got an IQ of 80 and you can't do anything of value, that's no reason why you can't have a waterfront mansion like that guy over there. And so, let's put you all in a bus, you illiterate peasants, and we'll drive around the wealthy areas of the city, and we'll drive past. Look at those fancy swimming pools. Look at all those hot blonde chicks. I mean, wow! Look at that house, and look at that fancy boat they've got out there. You can have all that. In a communist society with equality, you can have all that. And so that's yours. That will be yours. The people will own that. That means you will own that. That means you will have a waterfront. And to simple people, like, oh, well, holy fuck, of course I'm going to vote for that. Now, the same goes even in the West. Now, you wouldn't think in the West, in the richest countries in the world, that they would be susceptible to that type of... but instead of going for class, which they... the Marxist agitators and stirrers, trained in the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union was committed to world communist revolution. Instead of going for class, which they did through the unions, instead of that, though, they would play the gender card. Women, why don't you have, why aren't you president of the bank? Woman, Jane, well, why aren't you president of the bank? So, it's because you're being oppressed. That's why. Just think of all the nice things you could have if you had that. Look at that big office they've got. Look at the respect that this person is treated with. The crawling and the groveling and the brown nosing. You can have all that. And the only reason you haven't got it is because you're a woman. That's the only reason. And so they created a gender. Class has been not given up entirely on, but it's far lower down the rung than it used to be. So gender and race are the big, you could say sexuality, LGBTQ. Those are the three big hustles of the Marxist type structural social grievance playbook, and they're pushing it as hard as they can. And again, the globalists through the Democrats and through their flunkies in the West are pushing that very hard, and they've infiltrated, again, all the bodies politic of the West. So nonetheless, so these purveyors, now if you're running around all day doing nothing but saying the world's a terrible place, oppression, and you're a woman, you're oppressed, and rape, there's an epidemic of rape, there's an epidemic of violence against women, and so on. All of it's lies. It's all invented or so outrageously exaggerated to be an invention. And you get, you invent fake statistics, get the media to run the story, so it gins up sort of supposed public outrage. But you're doing this all your life, and it has an effect on you. And so the people at the apex of all this propaganda purveying, saying, evil, oh, you're oppressed, and oppression is everywhere, and so on and so forth, they themselves succumb to the propaganda. It has a death by 1,000 cuts effect on them. So here's a case which is rather sad, I think. Now, one of the pioneers of the 1960s radical feminist Marxist sort of revolution that was going around at the time, they're nearly all Jewish ladies, by the way, many of them lesbians, and the ones who weren't lesbians were bi. She got into it quite young. I think she got her first book deal when she was like 20 years old. So a Jewish publishing house gave her a book deal and heavily promoted her book, which was a ragtag of Marxist absolute nonsense. and all the libraries bought it. It was in all the universities, so it got very large, pre-organized advance orders only because it was leftist propaganda. And this same woman wrote multiple book deals. Lived in a fancy apartment in New York, and got speaking gigs. Was treated as an authority on the matter of feminism, and was a demigod. And this it's just Marxist trash and nonsense that she spouted. But nonetheless, she was quite iconic. The go-to for a comment. Now, as time went on, she was never able to form a relationship with a man. She did want that, or so she claimed. She had some very fleeting, short-term relationships. She was nothing to look at. She was no beauty queen, but she considered that an outrage. Why do I have to look good to attract a man? I should be able to have any man I want, because in a communist society, we're all equal. So even though I'm nothing to look at, in fact, I'm seriously unattractive, but that shouldn't matter. In a society of equality, my beauty should be considered equivalent to any other woman's. And therefore, the fact that I'm looked at as being ugly and undesirable as a partner, intimate sexual partner, that just shows how much Marxist work we have to do to re-engineer society. So she had these unusual views that aren't alone, by the way. I went to a union meeting, or what turned out to be a meeting of radical leftist unions, and they got up. A woman got very, very solidly built, chunky woman, nothing to look at, covered in freckles, and her hair was unkempt, and she definitely wasn't holding back on the fatty foods and the candy, and she was there saying, look, I just want to, why can't I have a hot guy? Why do the hot chicks get the hot guys? I want a hot guy. I want him to, why shouldn't he be at home preparing dinner when I get back? And so raving Marxist nonsense. So it's not, but anyway, she quoted this woman, this young feminist from the 1960s, about this idea that Marxism and equality means that the ugliest women can get the hottest guys, or the hottest guys have to share themselves around with the ugliest women. That's Marxism. So anyway, this woman died not that long ago, and she's never had a relationship in her life that's lasted longer than 5 minutes. She's quite well to do, because she was given, again, lots of very undeserving book deals, and she was paid advance sums that were quite considerable, only because of her leftist propaganda. And again, she did a lot of speaking engagements. She wrote a lot of columns for various magazines and newspapers, where she was paid handsomely for those. I don't know why. A lot of it was syndicated, so she was getting ridiculous sums of money, like 2,000 word piece, and she's getting like $10 a word, this sort of thing. But she's writing one of these pieces quite frequently. So she actually, I think she had quite a decent above average intellect, but it was so caught up in ideological fanaticism and her own anger and hatred, her own issues. I think she was a nutcase, actually, that she wasn't able to turn anything into a worthwhile sort of longer term, whether it be a relationship or anything else. She couldn't even have a longer term lesbian relationship. She gave up. I think she was bi, but she gave up thinking that she'd ever have a relationship with a man, and was outraged where other women were successful in having relationships with men. They were just sellouts and all that sort of thing. She couldn't even get a lesbian relationship going. So anyway, she died, but she had almost no interaction with other people. So she died, and her dead body was in the apartment for weeks. No one, because nobody called or visited her, or she didn't, have any sort of relationships there, that nobody knew. And yet it wasn't like she was some nobody, who'd worked at the factory and their relatives had all died or something, this type of thing. She managed to alienate pretty much everybody, and so nobody visited, came around, called, and the only thing that she died not far from the doorway, and so the decomposing body started to stink, and it was only when people started mentioning, what's that terrible smell coming from the apartment? We haven't seen her for some time. And then they went in and found the well decomposed dead body. Now, what if you look at the sum total of this woman's life? What is if you're a purveyor of hysterical propaganda, which she was, all men are bad, straight white males are the evilest of the evil, of the mostest of evil, and so on. They're all Hitler and the like. They're all rapists and oppressors. When you're telling those lies that are simply not true, and you're making up all sorts of fantasies to justify the ideological perception of oppression in society, the richest, fairest, most bountiful society in the world in human history, you're trying to say that the oppressions are just off the charts in such a society. Would you dare go to China and do that? I mean, you wouldn't last 5 minutes. They throw you in prison. So she only does this, it's so, the oppression is terrible. And she only does that in the softest touch societies where she knows she can say those sorts of things, all the while claiming that she's being terribly oppressed. But she died, and she's had no relationships. What has she left behind other than just a whole load of nonsense and lies? She was a useful pawn and tool for the social justice warrior agitators and activists. But apart from that, she died alone. Nobody cared. Nobody gave a shit. And in spite of her iconic status, no one had a kind word to say about her when she was dead. And so, is that the sum total of your life? You were unloved by anybody. That there was, there was no relationships that had any value or any sort of strength to them that people would go, I wonder how so and so's doing. I better check. Nothing like that. And I think that's a great tragedy. But when you spread so much hate, especially it's the fantasy hate, the stuff you invent about how terrible everything is, you acquire that view that, everything is terrible. Everything is so bad. And so she keels over dead one day and no one notices or cares. And yet, in the decades previous, she was considered one of the great international icons of the feminist all men are bad movement. There you go. Is it really worth it? You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.